been about 6 months since it happened. On that rainy evening, I had just finished delivering an order to a small local home. Tired and ready to finish the job, I was about to head home when another notification for a new delivery popped up on my screen. For a moment, I wondered if I should take this additional order or go home after all. But in the end, the promise of extra money took over, especially since the delivery location was only a few minutes away from my home. I quickly gathered my groceries, entered my new address, and started driving. Raindrops pounded on the windshield, and the sound of the running engine filled the silence of the night. Because of the heavy rain, no one else dared to take to the roads, creating an eerie atmosphere. As I approached the house, I was struck by its derelict appearance. Peeling paint, boarded-up windows, and a neglected front yard greeted me as I drove by. It clearly stood out from the other, better-maintained houses. I double-checked the address and made sure it was the right place. Taking a deep breath, I walked to the front door. Placing my food on the floor, I quickly took a picture of the house and knocked on the door, stepping back a bit. The door creaked and opened, and a woman with neglected hair and a scruffy appearance appeared before me. The dark circles under her eyes spoke of agonizing sleepless nights, reflecting the neglect of this house. The interior of the house also gave a disturbing impression. Empty rooms, cluttered, lacking furniture, and littered with trash. The woman noticed me watching her and stared at me intently without much expression. Maintaining the appearance of a calm delivery man, I wished her good night and headed back out. Through the downpour of rain, another voice reached me. Glancing over my shoulder, I noticed a man standing off to the side, watching me intently, checking to see if I was leaving. Hurrying back to the car, I took one more look at the house before starting the engine. But when I shifted into drive and pressed on the gas, the car failed to start smoothly. The car jerked forward and stopped again, making a horrible squeaking noise. Something with the rear tire seemed to be impeding my progress. As I reached out for my keys to open the door, I noticed right outside my window a man staring at me intently, from top to bottom. I flinched in surprise and jumped back, realizing that he had approached me unnoticed. He tapped on the window, making me freeze, not knowing what to do. His gaze darkened as I hesitated, and then I heard a subtle knock, as if he was discreetly checking to see if the door was locked. By some sudden decision, I pressed on the gas, trying to drive forward again. This time I was able to move forward and heard something metal hit the ground as the car came free. A man rushed toward my car, trying to grab hold of it as I drove away. Back home, I called the police, a logical action in such a situation. Although it was clear what had happened, it turned out that the house was an empty decoy designed by a woman and a man, perhaps to rob me, or even something more sinister. They were never found, but the police found a bent metal pipe on the side of the road that looked like a makeshift wheel lock. I couldn't be sure of their intentions, but I consider myself lucky to have managed to avoid any trouble. I always work so long hours that I often get home late, even early in the morning. Late-night commutes have their advantages. The roads are quiet and traffic is minimal. My workplace is close to a large city, and my home is only 20 minutes away. The route passes through stretches of road surrounded by forest, giving my night rides a special flavor. One evening, I finished work a little after midnight and headed home in my trusty SUV. The atmosphere was calm, the roads were empty, and the ride was easy. 5 minutes later, I arrived at the house and found myself on a secluded road, one lane in each direction, with narrow shoulders and a small ditch prefacing the woods on either side. A meager headlight illuminated the road. It was the only source of light on this serene night. Suddenly ahead, I saw some movement on the road, drawing my attention. Although deer crossings are common in this area, this figure looked different, was clearly human. The man, dressed entirely in black, stood abruptly in the middle of the road, facing my car as I approached. This unexpected sight puzzled me, and I reduced my speed. As I drove closer, I saw that he was wearing a black ski mask, a fact that aroused some suspicion. He stopped right in my path, forcing me to move into the oncoming lane of traffic to go around him. Since there were no other cars in sight, I performed this maneuver without fear. Suddenly, the man moved over, blocking my path. I decided to turn right to go around him, but he repeated my movement. Relentless pursuit in the dark. As I shortened the distance between us, it became clear that he was not going to give way. Stopping, I analyzed the situation. The man, silent and motionless, stood a mysterious obstacle in the road. Not knowing his intentions and sensing danger, I made the decision to back out. Engaging reverse, I began to roll back, but the man approached me, now purposefully. Increasing my reverse speed, I moved away from him, but I had limited reverse driving skills. The man switched to a sprint, quickly reducing the distance between us. Realizing that time was running out, I decided to turn around. Gripping the steering wheel, I made a sharp right turn, nearly driving off the road. Stopping, I made a quick left turn and shifted into forward gear. During the brief pause, the man tried to open the locked door on the passenger side, but unable to succeed, he began to kick it open until I was out of his sight. Looking in my rearview mirror, I saw him trying in vain to chase me. As I pulled away, he stopped on the road for a moment and then disappeared from sight. Taking a different route home, I contacted the police to report the incident. To my dismay, when they arrived, the mystery man had likely already fled. Arriving home 10 minutes later, I returned to my usual route. However, driving past the scene of the frightening encounter still gives me anxiety and a residual fear that someone might pop out of the woods. Fortunately, nothing like that has happened again since that frightening night. The motives for this man's actions remain a mystery, but the main relief is that I was able to avoid that horrible encounter. This is a story about an incident that happened to my friend's father, who was a professional truck driver. Hailing himself from Sacramento, California, he travels his huge truck all over the United States and even to Canada delivering goods. In 2009, his trip was particularly long as it was necessary to drive from Vancouver, located in British Columbia, to Toronto, Ontario. It was a huge route, including stops in cities such as Edmonton, Regina, and Winnipeg. One night during this long trip, he found himself driving on dark and lonely roads near the Alberta-Saskatchewan border. It was very late in the day, and he continued driving for several hours. Exhausted and wanting to get some rest, he decided to park his truck on the side of the road. With difficulty, he found a suitable quiet spot, parked his truck and settled in for a couple hours of sleep. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, something strange happened. He was sound asleep when suddenly there was a rumbling and thumping sound on the side of his truck. It seemed as if someone was forcibly trying to get into the cab sitting near the driver's seat. The noise caused him to snap out of his sleep and peek out the window of his truck through the curtain. In the faint light, he saw a figure standing in front of his door. My friend's father is not a man to mess with. About 80 centimeters tall and weighing about 110 pounds, he has always been strong and healthy. His summers spent driving and carrying heavy loads had only added to that strength. Therefore, he felt no serious fear. Pulling himself together, he opened the truck door and shouted loudly at the uninvited guest, and ordered him to get out, warning him of the consequences. The figure, silent and without uttering a word, recoiled fearfully and eventually disappeared into a neighboring field. In the blink of an eye, it vanished into the darkness, leaving no trace. But after that, my friend's father never wanted to sleep again. His anxiety soaked into every cell of his body. He started the car and continued driving nonstop until he finally reached Regina. After subjecting the incident to a comprehensive analysis of who the mysterious figure was and what it wanted, he could not come to any definite conclusion. The neighborhood in which the incident occurred was far from populated areas and devoid of domestic infrastructure. There were no houses or even other cars there. Because of the darkness, my friend's father never could make out whether it was a woman or a man. In the end, he was able to finish his journey to Toronto without further incident. But that strange encounter stayed with him for a long time. 13 years later, on every new trip, when he passes that area near Alberta and Saskatchewan, he can't help but think back to that night and wonder about the mysterious figure that appeared and disappeared so suddenly. My name is John. I want a strange story that happened to me today while celebrating Christmas. It all started at our family home where I live with my parents and younger brother Michael. We had just enjoyed a great holiday meal and were lazing around the house trying to figure out what to do next. It was then that the phone rang in front of Mom. It was our grandmother inviting her and the whole family to spend time playing board games. Mom was excited and eagerly responded to the invitation. After a while, feeling bored, I decided to join the family gathering as well. After calling my mom and getting her approval, I left the house. However, as I approached my car, an unusual, uneasy feeling gripped me, as if an inner voice was urging me to stay put. But I, being a persistent and unwavering young man, ignored the feeling. I got into my car, turned on the radio, and left the driveway. Suddenly, as if out of nowhere, a black car whizzed past my car, nearly hitting my vehicle. I braked sharply, my heart hammering with fright. The driver of that car, a woman, was clearly furious, waving her arms, and quickly disappeared from sight. I was left stunned, but decided to ignore it, assuming she was just a reckless driver craving adrenaline. As I continued on my way, I made a right turn and noticed something strange. That same black car was parked in the driveway nearby. It hadn't been parked there before, and this woman was looking right at me, making me uncomfortable. I tried to ignore her presence and concentrate on getting safely to my grandmother's house, which was nearby. However, no matter what, the woman in the black car continued to follow me. At every turn, she ended up almost at the very tail of my car. I tried to calm down and told myself it was just a fluke. Finally, when I parked near my grandmother's house, she drove past me, her eyes burning with anger. Then with a squeal of tires, she sped off into the distance. Fear gripped me, but I did not want to disturb my family, especially given their religious principles and concern for my well-being. My grandfather, a missionary and pastor, and my cautious mother would surely have been extremely disturbed upon learning of the incident, so I decided to keep it a secret. I tried to even forget about the whole incident and enjoy my family vacation, but as time went on, an uncertain uneasiness never left me. Few people knew that all this was just the beginning of mysterious events that would unfold later. After the strange encounter with the woman in the black car, I assumed this would all be over, but I was sorely mistaken. A few days later, when I was coming home to meet my dad and brother Michael, I saw her again. She was just sitting at the end of my street, being in the same car. I was frightened, but she drove away as soon as I got out of the car. By the next evening, it was time for a snack, and I, along with my mom and brother, decided to drive to the Walmart store. The route was pretty much the same as to Grandma's, except for a second right turn and a small stretch farther on. When we pulled into the parking lot, my heart squeezed. The black sedan was parked in the same corner again, but this time there was no woman in the car. I purposely parked far away from her, which caused my mom some confusion. She questioned why we were parking so far away when there was an empty space next to the sedan. I didn't feel like explaining to my mom about the woman, so after some thought, I parked the car next to the black sedan. I was very nervous, but I tried to stay calm. As we entered the store, I noticed this woman. She was short, about 180 centimeters tall and thin. She had unkempt dark hair and very pale skin. She seemed anxious and nervous as she stood in the store. I tried not to look at her and got some chips and a drink. While my mom was paying, I decided to check out some movies on the Redbox machine. Suddenly, I noticed the woman again. She came up right behind me, and I realized that she wasn't just waiting for the red box with the movie. There was another empty box next to me. I was a pretty big guy, used to playing defense, hockey, and lifting weights, but I was getting really scared. She just stood next to me, silent, and I could feel her stare. And then the scariest thing happened. She leaned very close to me and whispered, "I have a knife and I love meat." I panicked, pushed her away, and ran to the car with my mom and Michael. As we were driving away from there, I saw her in the rearview mirror. She just stood there and gave me a stare. Now I was really concerned. She knows what I look like, what kind of car I have, where I live, and where my grandparents live. I told my family about her and everything to look out for. If she shows up again, I'm ready. But I can't shake the feeling of anxiety knowing she's out there somewhere and could come back at any moment. A few years ago, I had an experience that will forever be etched in my memory. At the time, I was working as a driver for a car-sharing service called Uber in a major city. Because I had another job during the day, my shifts were mostly at night. Working as a driver for Uber was not a bad way to make money. The nights were mostly quiet, with fairly pleasant passengers and normal rides. However, one night in particular stands out in my memory. It was a cool Wednesday evening. The streets were usually quite quiet on weekdays, unlike the noisy weekends. I parked my car outside an apartment complex, waiting for the next passenger. The streets were dimly lit, the streetlights creating long shadows on the ground. As I sat in the car, time seemed to stretch and crawl very slowly. I periodically glanced at the clock in the car, watching the minutes stretch almost endlessly. My attention was drawn to the entryway of an apartment building. While I waited, several people exited the house, but my passenger was nowhere to be seen. Passenger delays were common, so I wasn't too concerned, although I was a little annoyed. Then, as if out of nowhere, a stranger jumped into the back seat of my car. He wasn't one of the residents of the house, which made me a little uneasy, but I assumed he must be my passenger, a young guy in his early 20s, wearing a voluminous coat, baseball cap, and sunglasses, even though it was already night outside. Before I even had a chance to greet him, I noticed him suddenly draw his gun. My heart sank in my chest as it dawned on me that I was in danger. He ordered me to get out of the car and hand him the phone. I knew it was pointless to argue or resist. Obeying his demands, I walked out into the cold street without my coat. I felt defenseless as I watched my car disappear from sight, leaving me alone in my predicament. Panic gripped me. I found myself vulnerable, without my phone and not knowing what to do next. The thief had left me in a desperate situation, and I needed to find a way to get help. After this frightening incident, I started walking down the street hoping to find help. Eventually, I met a kind man who graciously allowed me to use his cell phone to call the police. Standing about a block away from the robbery scene, I anxiously awaited the arrival of the police officers. It wasn't long before I heard the sound of a police siren approaching. When the police arrived, I quickly identified myself. Shaking from the cold and still in shock from the experience, I was able to reconstruct all the details of the incident to the police officers, hoping it would help them find the thief. They assured me that they would do everything possible to find the stolen car and the culprit. Since the robbery happened less than 10 minutes ago, they thought the thief hadn't gotten far. One of the police officers kindly offered me a ride home. Fortunately, I had my house keys with me. That night, I was unable to sleep. I spent my waking hours distracted by reading news on the internet. Then, in the early morning hours, I received a call from the police. They'd found my car. It appeared abandoned on a highway outside of town, and the driver had been apprehended. He had a gun that matched the description of the man who stole my car. I was soon relieved to have my car back. Surprisingly, it was not seriously damaged. The only problems were the smell of cigarette smoke and burns on the passenger seat. After this scary experience, I took a number of measures to improve my safety. I started always locking my car doors and opening them only after a passenger introduces themselves. This is a bit of an inconvenience, but has become an absolute necessity, especially when I work at night. I also installed a surveillance video camera in my car. In retrospect, I realize I should have done this much sooner. These precautions gave me a sense of confidence and helped me feel a little safer working night shifts as a driver for the Uber cab service.